You spend years looking for a good anxiety expert that gives real-world advice and effective anxiety-reducing tips, and then two come along all at once. That's right, today I've got some help. Welcome back to the channel, or if this is your first time, I'm Tim Box, mind coach, anxiety therapist, and author of the book Clear Your Head. For more than a decade now, I've been working one-to-one with clients to help them overcome all sorts of anxiety-related issues. But someone who's been working in this field even longer is my good friend Howard Cooper, who you may know from his appearances on BBC's Morning Live show, where he's the resident anxiety expert and regularly answers viewers' anxiety-related questions. So in this video, Howard has been kind enough to join me to give you a few of our top tips on how to reduce anxiety and get back in control of the way we think, feel, and respond. So for the first tip, it's straight over to Howard.
So I'm going to dive straight in. My 11-year-old son came home from school the other day, all excited. "Daddy, I've got a riddle for you." And then he proceeded to share it with me. Imagine you're trapped in a room with no doors and no windows. There's a fire in the room that's getting closer and closer to you. How do you stay safe? After a few moments of me trying to process the question, he giggled and said, "Stop imagining." Duh. However, I don't agree. And I'm going to prove it to you by, according to my son, putting my life on the line for you. I'm going to take 10 seconds right now and genuinely imagine exactly that. Being trapped in a burning room with no doors, no windows, and flames, getting closer and closer, and even setting me on fire. Here goes. Wish me luck. Okay, so I did that. Now tell me, at what point just now as you were watching was I actually in any danger? None, right? So we didn't actually need to stop imagining it in order to stay safe at all. In fact, imagining you're trapped in a room is very different from actually being trapped in a room. There isn't really a problem to solve. But so often people will imagine all sorts of things like, what if something terrible happens? Or other people think I'm worthless. And we kind of forget that we're imagining. And if we forget we're imagining it, we start trying to solve this problem that isn't actually happening. For example, we start having to alter ourselves to try and make other people like us or value us, or start trying to avoid situations in case of what-if scenarios. So my first top tip is, when you feel anxious, remember to check in with the question, is there actually anything to solve, or have I just imagined things that right now aren't actually happening? What if you remembered that chances are there isn't even a problem to solve? Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Howard. We'll be back with Howard shortly for his next tip, but my first anxiety tip won't surprise anyone who regularly watches the channel. It's the one I talk about most, but for me always has to be top of the list, and that is to be kind to yourself. When it comes to anxiety, it's important to remember that we're not anxious about the thing, we're anxious about our perceived ability to cope with the thing. This means that how we view ourselves in terms of self-worth and self-esteem is going to play a pivotal role in whether or not we feel able to cope with life's challenges. Our perceived capacity to handle life dictates how threatened and thus how anxious we feel. So it shouldn't come as any shock to discover that every time we beat ourselves up, thus impacting negatively on our self-esteem, we create a slightly better environment for increased anxiety levels. Now, if you want to feel more anxious for longer, then crack on. Beat yourself up as much and as often as possible. But I'm guessing you don't want that. I'm guessing you want to be free from all the excessive anxiety. In which case, no matter how you feel about your journey right now, maybe you're not doing as well as you think you should be, maybe others around you seem to be achieving more, or maybe you feel down about just how much anxiety you're feeling right now. Please remember that the story you tell yourself will become your reality. Understand that your opinion on how you're doing inevitably comes from a negatively biased perspective. The simple fact that you have a direct line to the knowledge of your own shortcomings and only see the surface level of everyone else's endeavours will inevitably cause you to look on yourself through a self-critical lens. That's okay, just make sure you stop short of being down on yourself for all of your perceived flaws. As you'll often hear me say, if you beat yourself up, you just end up beaten. I guarantee you're doing better than you give yourself credit for, and recognising your own value will help you do even better. Back to you, Howard.
Lovely insight, Tim. And now I'd like to build further on my first tip by sharing an insight that if you can truly get your head round, it can make a massive difference to your journey of beating anxiety. People often think that anxiety is a protection mechanism designed to keep you safe. And this may have been true at some point in the evolution of the species, but it's definitely not now. As far as I'm concerned, anxiety is your body responding to a perceived threat, not a real threat. Consider this. Heart disease and diabetes caused from too much sugar and processed foods are arguably one of the biggest causes of death these days. Sugar and processed foods really do pose a threat, but how many people do you see in the shops walking down the candy or sweet aisles freaking out? None, right? Whereas I often encounter people who freak out when they see a spider which can't hurt them at all. So I'd argue that anxiety these days is an outdated evolutionary response and doesn't tell you whether or not you're safe. So if anxiety isn't protecting you, where does it come from and what does it tell us? Well, I think anxiety does tell you one thing, and one thing only. The feeling of anxiety tells you the extent to which you got caught up in your thinking. And remember, just because you think or imagine something doesn't make it true. Take an example. You're worrying about what if I screw up in a job interview. If you're picturing screwing up, and then you forget that you're the creator of that thought in that moment, then your body will respond with anxiety. But that feeling hasn't come from screwing up the job interview. It's only come about by forgetting that there is no problem to solve. You were just imagining something. So keep in mind, anxiety doesn't tell you there's a threat. The only thing it tells you is to remind yourself you're just imagining. Now, back to you, Tim, in the studio. I've always wanted to say that.
Thanks, Howard. That's awesome stuff. My next tip kind of follows on from Howard's idea that if we think something, it doesn't make it true. My tip is to listen to your anxious thoughts. Now, this might sound tremendously counterintuitive, and bearing in mind it's the anxious thoughts that are the problem, it might also sound like a terrible idea, but hear me out. Most of us put a lot of energy into trying to ignore or stifle those anxious thoughts and feelings. All that generally achieves is to reinforce the idea that these thoughts are worthy of fear. It simply cements the concept that there's something threatening about them, whether that be their content or just the fact that we're having them. It also means the part of our mind trying to deliver a message is being ignored, and the result of that might just be for that part to shout even louder. So in effect, our resistance to the anxiety just creates more anxiety. But what if we accept that anxious thoughts are nothing more than a part of our mind trying to get our attention about a concern of some sort? What if we accept that there's nothing inherently threatening or dangerous about having those thoughts? Then we allow that part of our mind not only to be heard, thereby eliminating the need for it to shout the message any louder, but also we demonstrate there's no cause for alarm and thus invalidate the idea that this thought is in itself of any threat. So listening to our anxious thoughts was never the problem. It was only the fear we brought to the process that was. Okay, we've got time for one more anxiety tip. So Howard, it's back to you.
Oh, I love that one, Tim. Observing anxiety without judgment or sensations. And I'd like to add my slant on this as I share my third top tip. Have you ever experienced this? You're walking along and it starts raining. You don't have your umbrella with you, so you start running in order to get out of the rain. However, there is nowhere to go and the rain starts coming down even heavier. And then, if this keeps going on, have you noticed there comes a point at which you become so wet, so utterly drenched that you end up giving up trying to escape it? At this point, you kind of surrender to the rain, to the experience of being wet through. And yes, there is some unpleasantness in how wet you feel. But isn't there also a weird sense of psychological liberation? The feeling of freedom as you stop fighting that which you can't change, the rain. And then you see people, don't you, running past, still trying to get out of the rain, and you giggle to yourself and you think, ha ha, how little do they know? No escape here. Well, I think when it comes to anxiety, there are some big similarities here. There is the anxiety that people are experiencing, and then there's the internal fighting that goes on with it too. The, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I should be coping better. I mustn't be struggling with this. It shouldn't have lasted this long. In other words, it's like running along in the storm shouting, it shouldn't be raining. I mustn't be getting wet. Well, what if you did something counterintuitive? Take a moment and notice how it feels to stop fighting those I shouldn't feel this way thoughts. You do feel this way. There's no should about it. I wonder if you can notice the internal shift that comes with letting go of the demand to feel anything other than how you are feeling at this moment. Acknowledging the reality of how you currently feel doesn't mean you'll always feel that way. But think of it this way. There's a well-known saying, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. But I think a much more helpful saying is, when life gives you lemons, what if it's okay it tastes bitter? Just remember it won't last forever. I mean, can you imagine how much physical tension is involved with eating a bitter lemon and through gritted teeth pretending to yourself, it's lovely and sweet? This whole idea often gets thrown up when people say, I just wish I could go back to how things used to be. In other words, I should be feeling different from how I am feeling right now. Can you hear that self-judgment? As an aside though, I will also share this extra thought. If you're having a really tough time, I genuinely do not believe that you actually want to go back to how things used to be before this period, because back then you still had all this shit ahead of you. Whereas now you've already got past so much of it, you must be nearly through. Now, back to Tim.
Howard, thank you so much for giving us the benefit of your wisdom today. And if you like what Howard was talking about, then I strongly suggest you head over to his channel, Howard Cooper's Rapid Change Works, for more of his awesome anxiety advice. I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you like what I've spoken about and aren't yet subscribed to the channel, then hey, why not do that now? And you could also like and share this video. Every bit of engagement helps grow the channel and helps more people get the help they need. Also, if you want to take a bit of a deeper dive and would like some ongoing support, then why not become a member of the channel? For just £9 a month, you get access to hours of extra content and a weekly member exclusive live Q&A with me every Wednesday. Just hit the join button on the home page. But that's it for now. I'm Tim Box. Always remember, be kind to your mind, and I'll see you next time.